Hello everyone and welcome back today to another installment here on the channel. And today's going to be a little different. This isn't going to be your standard Let's Play style video. Instead, I'm going to be talking about the state of the game. There has been a lot of hot topics floating around lately that I normally wouldn't dedicate a full video to, but I think in this case it actually warrants a real discussion. So I figured I want to touch on those matters and give my own thoughts on. But the biggest one a lot of people are asking is, are Continental spawns bad for the game? So before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video, I want to feed you your vegetables first. And let's start with probably the biggest thing every player in this game talks about. Acquisition. Ludia has definitely taken steps to address complaints, but the reality is the amount of coins we're awarded just doesn't make a dent in what we'd actually need. Taking a creature from level 16 to 25 costs around 400,000 coins, and when we're getting 5 to 11,000 coins at a time, that's basically nothing in comparison. One way I think this could be improved is with a weekly strike tower. Maybe on Fridays when tournaments start, where after a successful completion, you earn somewhere between 150,000 to 350,000 coins. This wouldn't break the economy, but it would finally give players meaningful progression. You could spread it across your team, invest it in hybrid components, or just dump it into one creature you're trying to max. And honestly, I think that kind of system would bring creativity back because players wouldn't feel forced to only level 1 or 2 meta picks. Now, coins aren't the only part of progression that feels a little underwhelming. If we're talking about rewarding effort, we also have to talk about alliances. Very quickly, I think the alliance incubators we receive every Monday should rotate rewards every few months. That way players, especially in those higher power alliances, can gradually stockpile different types of DNA instead of the same things we've been getting for months on end. This also goes for like strike towers as well. It keeps things fresh and actually makes long-term alliance player commitment feel more rewarding. Speaking of alliances, I know I'm on this topic a lot. Very briefly, I want to bring up sanctuaries. I actually think the core system is solid. The feed, interact, and play mechanics work, and it encourages alliance coordination. However, recently, if you'll remember, Ludia did put out a poll and they flirted with the idea of a potential sanctuary. They basically came with the idea of a potential sanctuary change in a recent poll, which honestly, in my opinion, looks very fun. So it's clearly something that they're thinking about and putting a lot of thought in. I don't know why that was so hard for me to put out, but it was. I'm going at this like with no script, so like please forgive me if like any of what I'm saying does not make sense. Personally, I just think the DNA rewards, especially for epic creatures in those sanctuaries, could be increased slightly. Getting 6 to 10 DNA sometimes feels a little bit underwhelming for the time investment we're putting in. I'm not saying a complete overhaul, but small bump in rewarding would make sanctuaries feel a lot more impactful in that general regard. Now, all of what I just covered talks about the economic side of the game. However, there's still another major conversation we need to have, and that's the meta itself, which has been feeling quite stagnant. I think a big part to play in this is the lack of reworks we've been getting, and if you'll recall from a while ago in the JMCD days, every update we'd receive around 10 or more creature buffs. And those were honestly very fun. Even if the changes themselves weren't so significant, it brought new life into the game and cool little niches in the tournaments as well. And lately, we've been getting very few, if any, changes. What I think they should do is follow the formula Marvel Snap does and do weekly or bi-weekly OTA changes. And if you'll recall from like a while ago, I used to do Marvel Snap content as well. So, for example, every other Thursday, they drop 5 to 10 changes into the game. Small stat reworks, maybe an ability change here and there, and then save bigger buffs or nerfs for the updates themselves. It's very hard to balance a game, and I have no idea if this is as easy as it sounds, but I think it's something many players would appreciate and look forward to. Another thing that I think would help shake up the meta and make progression feel better is adding more commons and rares into the game. Right now, there are 46 commons and 48 apexes. And honestly, that's kind of a crime. The prehistoric world is full of options, and I really believe there are plenty of paleo nerds at Ludia who would love to see some of their favorites, just get picked and experiment with extremely weird or wacky body styles. And personally, if you asked me to pick a period, I'd go with the Triassic because, again, that period is just goofiness final boss. And while we're on the topic, I think a lot of those creatures in that area would make for some very nice commons or rares. So that's just my opinion. And while we're on the topic of expanding creature options, I also think it's high time we got more rare hybrids. It's been way too long since we've seen any, and adding more would be so fun for skill formats, especially as someone who is now trying to grind in tournaments. So I beg Lydia, please, we need this. We're kind of commonless. Jokes aside, I do want to bring up something that isn't necessarily the biggest problem, but one I don't see being talked about much either, and that is creature power benchmarks, and where they should sit in the meta. In my opinion, the creatures that should be meta play very, very specific yet outclassed niches or are totally irrelevant in this game's environment. For example, I just had the biggest 18-wheeler just plow right by, and it sounded like a plane taking off. I am so sorry for that. Anyway, if you look at some of the harder to get apexes, such as Compsognator, Glyptosaurus, or Trichognator, those creatures are locked behind very exclusive or continental DNA, and because they are that much more difficult to create, they should be correctly adjusted as such. And to Lydia's defense, these hybrids were very strong in their prime. So now that I think about it, this would actually align more with the frequent buffs portion of the video I just went over. What I'm really advocating for is clearer power benchmarks tied to acquisition difficulty. The hardest apexes like Baryotor or Beckelrisaurus sit near at the top of the meta. And that makes sense. Their components are incredibly exclusive, requiring arena, raid, and continental DNA. That level of grind should reward that level of power. So if I were in charge, and if I were to structure creature power based on acquisition difficulty, I would probably do something like this. At the very top, you'd have the ultra exclusive apexes, the ones that rely on continental DNA, arena exclusives, raid components, or a mix of the three. These should be the crown jewels of the game. They require the most time, the most access, and the most commitment, so it makes sense for them to sit at the top of the meta. Following a step and a half behind would be the more farmable hybrid apexes. These creatures should still be strong and competitive, but not completely eclipsed by the ultra exclusives. Instead, I think they should fill more important niches or serve as soft counters to the top tier. Just in general, very fun apexes. And then at the bottom of that structure would be the raid exclusive apexes. If you spend 2 months consistently raiding, you absolutely deserve a strong creature. But they probably shouldn't outperform the hardest to unlock apexes in the game, or even surpass certain uniques that require significantly more restrictive DNA sources. That said, speaking of raids, I do think the system itself might need another update. Raids don't quite feel the way they did back when they were introduced in 2020. I'm not sure if it's the lack of new raid pex bosses, or if the format itself just needs a refresh, but something about them just feels less impactful and fun than before, so I might just be burnout, but I have not seriously raided in a long time. I can't think of the last time I raided Hadros, Sarah Magnus, more and you know I've been a huge raider in my past content creation, so something just needs to change, I think. Overall though, the goal here isn't to make everything stronger, it's just to make progression feel consistent and effort feel properly rewarded. I understand balancing a game, like I said earlier, isn't easy. But if there were clearer power benchmarks tied to acquisition difficulty along with the consistent balance changes, I think the meta would feel healthier in the long run. And now we loop back to the main contention I brought up at the start of this video. Continentals. Since their introduction back in 2.8, if memory serves correctly, they've been a really neat concept on the surface. The idea that certain regions have access to different creatures adds personality to the map and makes the world feel more alive, as the game name suggests. But lately, with the release of apexes like Central Office Lux and Baryotor, some cracks have started to show. If you're in North America, you're seeing plenty of Centrosaurus. If you're in Europe, you're probably seeing Megaraptor instead. And a common question I've seen is, how are players supposed to unlock one of the strongest apexes in the game if part of it is locked behind a regional wall? And honestly, I kinda agree. There's genuine merit to that concern. However, at the same time, I can understand the design philosophy. It's cool to have regional identity. Seeing a Baryotor and knowing that player is from Europe adds personality to the latter. But when those creatures are among the strongest in the game, it creates tension between identity and accessibility. And that's where the broader discussion about power benchmarks and progression really matters. So what would I propose? I really don't have anything off the top of my head, or rather anything written down, but Honestly, I do nothing extreme, just a clear direction. If Continentals are meant to stay region exclusive, then I think there needs to be intentional structure behind it. One option, for example, would be probably delayed global access, meaning keep them exclusive for 6 months to a year, and then introduce ways for other regions to obtain that DNA through events or raids. That keeps the identity aspect while avoiding permanent walls. Another approach would be committing fully to the exclusivity model. If a creature is permanently region locked, then make it like an absolute crown jewel of that region and let it sit clearly at the top of the meta. Or alternatively, keep it slightly below the absolute strongest tier so it doesn't create a hard like competitive, count like barrier between us and the people that actually do have it, like the 0.5%. A third possibility could be rotating continental pools every few months, so exclusivity exists but it isn't permanent. That way, regional identity is preserved without locking players out on the long term. Or hell, even having a third map like we currently have in the game, like with the second geological map we have, taking us to Europe or America, allowing us to scent for these creatures, could probably be a very cool addition. I'm not saying these should be the definitive answers, but I do think having a clear philosophy behind Continentals would make the system feel much more intentional. However, with the way Continentals and progression are currently handled, a lot of people are understandably frustrated, and recently, one of the most dominant players in the game, IDGT, decided to take a step back. And when someone of that caliber takes a step back, it is worth mentioning, and partly one of the reasons why I decided to make this video in the first place. Because if memory serves correctly, the last time this happened was back in 2020, like right after 2.0 launch. So to see that happen again is quite jarring. You might ask, what difference does that make to me? And it should make a lot of difference to you. The answer is simple. Players like him represent the highest level of investment in the game. They grind the hardest, lead top alliances, and quite literally push the meta forward. So when someone like IDGT feels the need to take a break, it signals that the progression in the meta needs a desperate change or something in the game. Because that's going to start to create a domino effect of players who are on the fence about if they should stay or leave. And I'm not saying this because he is a peer of mine in this content creator subspace. I am saying it because, like him, I like this game. I enjoy playing it. However, there are big problems that need to be addressed. For every one good thing they do, they seem to either take 1 or 2 steps or even 3 steps back. And the community gets frustrated, and it's unfortunate to see that happen because I'm just passionate about this game. So, and that's not to say that the game like this shouldn't have flaws. It is perfectly fine for a product to have flaws as long as the people behind it take the needed steps to address said flaws and have better connections with their community. And people like Hadrian in the Paleo.gg Discord server perfectly prove that point, that they do care for their player base. But as it currently stands, I'm still here. I'm still going to make content and play the game. Whatever they do from here, I'll try my best to communicate with them and just relay any feedback you guys might have. But let me know what you guys thought of this video and my points. I'm sorry if I was stuttering or if anything didn't make sense. I'm really hungry right now, so I'm coming from the point of I need to finish this up quickly before I starve to death. Not let's be hyper analytical and solve problems. But with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this one. Post any agreements or disagreements down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.